Hey everyone, my name is John Mills, and today I'm going to be talking about the importance of free speech and why is it important for us to have that in our society today. So, free speech, it's basically just, the right to speak freely and to not have any restrictions on what you say, no government restrictions, no laws, no anything like that where it's preventing you from saying certain words or saying certain phrases. And so here, this is just the First Amendment of the United States Constitution, first of the Bill of Rights. And seeing that this is in the United States, Charlotte, most of us, I'm assuming, are residents and citizens of the United States of America. And because of that, we are granted rights to freedom of speech, and we are allowed to freely exercise our religion. We have freedom of the press, and we're able to peaceably assemble, and we're able to petition the government, as it says, for redress of grievances. And now this isn't not throughout the whole world is there freedom of speech, unfortunately, but luckily for us as residents of the United States, we do have freedom of speech, and that does come through the Constitution. And as it says in this, they are not allowed to make any laws or anything to stop us from speaking freely. And so this is just a post from Instagram, and it's about censorship. It's just kind of like a quote from Charles Bukowski about that. And it really rings true because censorship is the tool of those who have the need to hide actualities from themselves and from others. I mean, because if you really think about it, a lot of times the people trying to censor the most are the ones that have the most to hide. And you look back throughout history, there's so many times where these just terrible governments, people, kings, queens, whatever it is, are preventing and taking away freedoms of their people, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, all these things. And at the same time, they're the ones who are having the most atrocities, or committing the most atrocities, and being just malicious and evil and just taking things from their people, abusing their power. And a lot of times they're using their power to suppress freedom of speech in order to suppress and hide their own wrongdoings. And see, this is a post from Facebook. It's a Ben Shapiro post, and it's just him talking about the banning of the former president and all that. And, this has just become a huge topic nowadays, and it's a huge problem. Well, I wouldn't say problem, but it's a huge topic of debate among people, whatever you may think about someone like Ben Shapiro, or you might think about the former president, at the end of the day, we're all still American citizens. And as it says in the First Amendment, that applies to all citizens. And we can't have people being banned and having their free speech taken away, prohibited, because of politics. No matter what side you land on, that's not a good thing. People might dislike Donald Trump, but what you have to think about is if it's happening to him and he's being banned for his views, well, then one day that could be happening to me. And so the topic of free speech, it's just really relevant in today's society. But what I've found oftentimes is a calm, rational conversation. It goes a great way in preventing conflict from two opposing forces. When you have these two people going at it and they're just yelling and fighting, think of like a bar fight. You have two people yelling and fighting at each other, and it's at the end of the day, there's no real purpose behind their argument, no real reason they are arguing. So there's no point in it, I mean, if they would just sit down and talk, usually it starts from one of them bumps into the other one on accident. And if they could just sit down and say, hey, I didn't mean to bump into you. I'm sure you didn't mean to bump into me. Let's just go our separate ways, and we'll have a great night. But unfortunately, that doesn't happen. And this is a quote from George Orwell, and it's just a really good one because it really reflects the truth. Oftentimes people hear things, they're told things, and they don't want to hear them because it hurts. The truth hurts. It hurts to be told, certain things, and it hurts to hear them, and you might say, I don't want to hear that anywhere. I want that banned. I don't want people to be able to freely speak that. But at the end of the day, a lot of those things are important for you to hear. You don't hate to be told by your parents, when you're growing up, you always think your parents are wrong. When you're getting in trouble and they're grounding you for doing certain things, you think, oh no, they're wrong. I should be able to do whatever I want. But then you grow up and you realize that you needed to learn those lessons. Those lessons shaped you into becoming a better person. Now, this is a video from the Joe Rogan Experience on YouTube, and it's a conversation between him and Jonathan Zimmerman on the importance of free speech. And the quote that I really want to take from this is, even with the best of intentions, it's people without power that are going to suffer. I really like this quote because I find that in many situations when people do have their speech restricted, it is those with the least amount of power that are affected the most, that are hurt the most from this. People that are wealthy, that are tons of money, they're able to adapt and overcome situations like this. But the people who are at the bottom of the totem pole already, when you start taking away their freedoms, they're affected the most out of anybody. And it's a slippery slope you go down. If you start taking away freedoms and you start, a lot of times this comes from good intentions. People, like if you look at hate speech, people want to ban hateful words because they don't want, people to hear them online and to be emotionally affected. And, but at the end of the day, what it comes down to it, you start banning hate speech. Well, what is hate speech? There's always going to be a person that is responsible for choosing which speech to ban. It's going to be some stranger because you're not going to know them. You're not going to know who it is. Do you really want to trust what you can and cannot say to some random stranger? I certainly don't, but that becomes the question you have to ask yourself when it comes to banning so-called hate speech. This is a great video that gets into it. And this is another Instagram post, and it's just an example of the power of speech when it comes to protesting and demonstrating. And it's extremely important. You look at our country today, protesting is a huge topic. People go out and they speak their minds, and they gather and they march in order to show that they are not okay with the way things are, that they want change, they want their politicians to do things about it. And that's a huge thing, if we look back in historical moments like the Civil Rights Act and Civil Rights movement back in the 60s, that was, those people out there like Martin Luther King, they were heroes, out there marching when they were afraid of the government. If you look at Selma and how that turned violent, they're afraid of situations like that, and they're still out there fighting for what's right. And, without freedom of speech, they could never be able to do that. It'd be impossible. It's just extremely important for us to have a prosperous and agreeable and happy society. And this is just a tweet. It's a picture of a stone called the Free Speech Stone. It's just another thing about World Press Freedom Day. It's just another important thing about speech, However you might feel about the press and about news and about media bias, all sorts of ways, I would agree that there's tons of it on, all over the internet. You'll find bias. Just with, any conversation you have with a person, they're going to have their own biases. But the press having the freedom to speak and report on what they want is essential to a successful society. And, in this last little bit, just, it doesn't matter, what you believe in, what your opinions are, whether you're religious, not religious, doesn't matter like who you are, everybody should have the right to freedom of speech. Everybody should be able to freely express themselves and should be able to say whatever they want to. I mean, I know that only in the United States we have freedom of speech, and then there's countries like China that do not have freedom of speech, that, heavily restrict what their people, what their citizens can see and can say. You can get jailed for dissenting opinions on the government. We see during the Hong Kong protests, Chinese government, they had the police use live rounds on protesters and dozens were injured. And so it's a real blessing when you think what we are able to do here in America. But it's important that we don't take this for granted and that we continue to fight and stand up for freedom of speech throughout the world. In my opinion, freedom of speech is the most important right granted to us by the U.S. Constitution, and we are extremely lucky to be granted it. It is one of the most important things that we have as a society here in America, is the ability to freely exercise our opinions, and it should never be taken lightly. Thank you everybody for listening to my project. I hope that it was in some way entertaining to you, or if not, well, sorry for wasting 12 minutes of your time. Have a great night.